Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm sharing with you how I made a quilt out of a lovely holiday fat quarter bundle. I picked up this bundle over 2 years ago. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it's been in my stash for 2 years. I'm finally using it today. Now, if you want a quick tutorial on a maple leaf block, I'll leave a link in the description. What I decided to do with this fat quarter bundle was make maple leaf blocks and put them together. And here is how I envision my quilt is going to look when it's finished. Step 1 is to take my fat quarter bundle, open it up, and press every single fat quarter. You might notice that I'm pressing these with the wrong side up. I find that it's easier for me to see the wrinkles when it's wrong side up. My next step was to figure out the best way to cut this fat quarter to get what I needed, and I was able to actually get enough fabric for 2 blocks out of each fat quarter. I'll put the specific measurements for my blocks in the description, but you can make these maple leaf blocks any size you want to. For each block, I needed 3 4.5-inch squares of this colored fabric and 2 5-inch squares. So I made myself a little map with 4.5-inch how many I could get, and then 5 inches how many I could get. But then I decided, oh wait, it's probably better if I do the 2 columns of 4.5 inches together and the 2 columns of 5 inches together. So that's that little switcheroo arrow I've got up there. So the bottom line, from each fat quarter, I'm going to cut 6 4.5-inch squares and 4 5-inch squares. Just like with the pressing, I thought it was easier to cut and see what I was doing on the wrong side of the fabric. I'm cutting a 9-inch square here to start with, then I'm going to be dividing that square into 4 pieces. Now, while I had the fabric this way, I went ahead and cut off a 4.5-inch by 9-inch piece for 2 additional squares. Now you can see I'm flipping this around. I'm lining up my ruler on 4.5 inches and 9 inches, and I'm squaring this up. And then I am going to cut it into 2 parts. So now I will have 2 4.5-inch squares. Now I'm going to take that first piece that I cut, then I'm going to flip that around. I'm going to square it up to a 9 by 9-inch square. Once it's square, I cut it in half vertically at 4.5 inches and then in half horizontally at 4.5 inches. And I've got 4 more squares that are 4.5 inches. Similar to what I just did, I'm going to cut a 10 by 10-inch square, get it all squared up and cut it in half both ways, and I'll have my 4 squares that measure 5 inches. I felt pretty confident stacking up 4 fat quarters to cut at the same time. And I don't plan on mixing and matching these, So I did sort them out into the right piles for each block. Now cutting out my background fabric was a little bit easier. All I needed for each block was 2 5-inch squares and 2 4.5-inch squares. And I'm cutting these from 10-inch squares that I cut myself from yardage that I got on sale quite some time ago. My first step was to simply cut the 10-inch square in half horizontally and then cut that piece into 2 5-inch sections. Then on the top section, I cut that at 9 by 4.5 inches, and then I cut that in half to make 2 4.5-inch units. I took 2 5-inch squares, 2 4.5-inch squares, made a stack, and then I mixed those into my stack of colored squares. I need to make half square triangles. I'm going to take 2 of the 5-inch background squares, draw a diagonal line across the square, corner to corner. Then I'm going to put those right sides together with a colored fabric. Next, I'm going to stitch on both sides of the line I drew. Then I will be cutting these units on the line that I drew, and that is going to make 4 half square triangles. I trimmed each half square triangle down to 4.5 inches square. I laid out my block pieces in the order that I was going to sew them. I'm going to sew the top row together, then the second row, then the third row, then I will be putting the 3 rows together. I did do a little bit of assembly line process making the half square triangles. I went through all my groups and drew my diagonal lines on the 5-inch background squares. Then I stitched down one side and I chain stitched, and I just kept adding to my chain, adding to my chain, adding to my chain. When I got to the end, I flipped it around and sewed them all on the other side. I'll leave a link in the description for this Blade Saver product, which I love. It makes taking apart the chains so easy. I cut apart, pressed, and trimmed all those half square triangles. I used the very first block I made as a pattern to lay out all my squares on top of, and then it would be easy for me to just pick up these rows one at a time, stitch them together. Now we're ready to start assembling these blocks. I thought that with the blocks stacked up the way they were, it would be easy for me to chain piece. So I took 2 blocks from the top row and stitched them together, and then I took 2 blocks from the second row and stitched them together. Then I took 2 blocks from the third row and stitched them together. And I only took the 2 blocks from the right hand side. I continued chain piecing the 2 pieces from the right hand side of the block in order: top, middle row, then bottom row, top row, middle row, bottom row, until I was all the way through my stack. And when I got to the very end, the only thing that's left on my table on the right hand side is my sample block that I made at the beginning. Next, I separated that chain and I made sure and kept the blocks in order. Then I laid them back down in the position where they fit. Then I added the left hand block to my unit of 2. And you can see it was pretty easy to keep all this in order because of the different prints. If these were all the same print, it would also be easy because there would be no room for mistakes. But with different prints, it works just as well because you can see exactly what you're going to be stitching together and that it is the same print. Now that I have all my rows put together, it's time to assemble the blocks. I'm going to start by stitching row 1 to row 2, then I will add row 3. And you can see I've got my sample block off to the left hand side so I can keep an eye on my sewing, make sure I'm not flipping anything around the wrong way. I flip row 2 up onto row 1 and I'm going to use that nesting technique to match up the seams. There are only 2 seams I need to match, and I'm going to put a clip. Once I have nested, I'm going to put a clip to hold everything together until I get it to the sewing machine. Once you've got clips in, it's easy to open that up, take a look, make sure your seams are lined up. Now we're going to add row 3 the same way, flip it up on top, and here's a little close-up of the nesting of the seams. What I like to do is make sure one seam is going one way, one seam is going the other way. That causes a little ridge, and those ridges will catch and lock on each other as you nest. Then put a clip, and you're ready to take it to the sewing machine. I did want to take a moment to talk about directional fabric. When you're doing the initial cutting and making your half square triangles, just take a minute to make sure that that directional fabric is going to be going the right way. In my case, these stripes, it didn't matter. They could have been upside down or right side up because they're only one way. But if you have some directional fabric that's going to matter, just think about it when you're doing your half square triangles. Maybe lay it out before you actually stitch the half square triangle together. All right. right, I got to the end of making these blocks, and back to my little diagram. This is how I'm going to attempt to lay out my quilt. With it being holiday fabric, I thought this made it look like wreaths. A lot of the fabric in this fat quarter pack was low volume. There were a couple that were darker. I ended up changing my mind quite a bit on this one. I took a lot of pictures in black and white and color because I just couldn't figure out what was wrong with my layout. And here is the final solution. I ended up with 4 of the darkest fabrics in the middle, and I thought that balanced it out a little bit better. I picked up my rows from left to right with the left block on top, and I put a clip on the top of the row. It's going to be pretty easy to assemble these rows, because overall the leaf has a direction, and I know that I'm making a wreath shape. Pretty easy to figure out how to put the first 2 blocks together, and then the 3rd and 4th block together, and then I will stitch those 2 units of 2 blocks together to make each row. With those first 2 blocks together, I next took the 3rd and 4th block from row 1, did my nesting technique on those seams, and only 2 seams per block to worry about. Now we're going to put block 1 and 2 unit together with the block 3 and 4 unit. And this is exactly the same. We're going to nest the 2 seams that need to match up, put a clip in them, and then stitch the seam. And here is our completed row 1. Now it's time to move on to the other 3 rows, and then we will put all the rows together. Now here I have my completed row 1, my completed row 2, and I'm making sure those are going the right way to make my little wreath shape that I'm looking for. Then I'm going to flip row 2 up onto row 1. Same way, we're going to nest the seams and then clip the seams and then stitch the seam. The only difference is there is a much larger number of clips to put 2 rows together. And I do want to say, if this quilt was going to be much larger than the approximately 48-inch square that I'm making, I would probably use clips on the seams, but then I would probably also use pins to hold everything in place until I could get to the sewing machine. The bigger it gets, the more unwieldy it will be, the more it will want to tug and pull and go off different directions. So I do recommend pins if it gets much larger than this small lap size. Once row 1 and 2 are sewn together, then I sewed row 3 and 4 together. Then I put both of those units together to complete this small lap quilt top. And here is my finished quilt top in this beautiful holiday fabric, including ironing the fat quarters, cutting out all the pieces, cutting out all the background fabric. This quilt top took a total of about 11 hours. And I love this block. It's very versatile. I've got a coloring sheet on my Etsy page for $1 that has some samples and some coloring pages that you can design your own quilt from this basic block. I love the way this quilt top turned out. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you back real soon.